Hey y'all, it's me, Brianka J. I want to thank you guys for joining me in my little corner of the internet where we talk all things books, literature, short stories, analysis, theories, you name it. We got it. Um, we are still doing the Spook Who Sat by the Door, but I wanted to double back and I wanted to talk about Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride because they just got voted Book of the Year, which isn't surprising because some of the elements that he speaks of in the book are really relevant to what's going on today, especially in terms of anti-Semitism. We got the Israel and Palestine war going on. We have a lot of talk about who's in the right, who's in the wrong, and like these anti-Semitic views that are coming across. And more recently has been a thing that's been encountered in African American dialogue and discourse, which is really new to me. So I thought it would be a great time to dive into this theme and talk about some of the elements that he draws out through his work, and then even like from his own perspective, what inspired him, what made him get here, and how it worked. So if you're interested in talking about that theme in detail, go ahead, get comfortable, get you some tea, get you some coffee. Well, it's a little late for coffee, but who knows what time you're watching. Do whatever you need to do to feel comfortable. We finna get into it. So the first thing I want to point out is just like his theme of anti-Semitism that runs throughout the book. Because to me, I thought it was really interesting that he chose to like talk about this and to kind of play on this. And what, if you haven't read the book or if you're studying for school, the main characters are either black or Jewish, and they're both trying to navigate American society from a minority perspective. Now, what he does in the book is kind of show how not only are black people kind of treated as lesser than, as minorities, and getting mistreatment by society, but to a degree, so are Jewish people. And he even starts to draw lines and similarities between the two cultures and really show how these two cultures have been interacting together throughout history. Now, so that's the people like Shona and Moshe. They are Jewish, but then we have like Addie and Nate who are black. Now, if you remember, Dodo, who is Addie and Nate's nephew, is being hunted down. Well, I don't want to say hunted, but he's being pursued by the government because they want him to go to Penhurst, which is a state board school for students who can't hear or have disabilities. And so Nate and Addie in the black community are trying to hide him, but they're in need of help. And the only people that come to their help is, of course, Moshe and Nate. I'm sorry, Moshe and Shona. I do I did enjoy the crossover a lot. I enjoyed it, but it did raise questions about the relationships. What is friendship? Like, for instance, I think that Shona and Moshe saw Nate and Addie as friends, but I would go on to argue that I don't believe Nate and Addie saw them as friends as much as they saw them as employers. And that was incredibly identified when we saw Dodo get put into Penhurst if you noticed, Nate and Addie didn't really like talk about it with Shona and Moshe. They didn't have a conversation about it. It didn't go into, well, I guess just Moshe. Nothing was really said. And when Moshe brought it up, Nate was kind of like, look, we gonna handle it. Don't concern yourself. Kind of like, don't concern yourself with black endeavors. The Jewish community does so anyway. So as you work throughout the book, the plots, the twists, the turns, you realize that even though Nate and Addie reject the help of the Jewish community, it was certainly the Jewish community's help by way of finances that allow, I guess, in some connections that allow them to be able to free Dodo and then to move to the farm. Dodo has a great life, and it was definitely a dual effort. The blacks seem to take a lot of the action in terms of manual labor, in terms of work, in terms of executing, and we see the Jewish community taking on the financial endeavors, the logistics, strategizing. This, I don't really want to share an opinion on like if that's racist or what it is. It's just kind of the way in which things work. So that's how it worked in Pottstown in James McBride's fictional story. But I want to say that he didn't like make that up out of sheer spite. That's not a racist type of attitude to look at it with, because that isn't that the same way we see it play out in the music industry. Like, it's the same thing where you see the black people are artists. They're writing music, they're making videos, they're dancing, they're rapping, they're trending, and then they use the strategy, they employ the strategies, and they utilize the resources and the money from the Jewish community in order to pave a new life for themselves. As of recent, we've seen people of Kyrie Irving, we've seen Kanye West, and we've seen a number of other people who have been coming out to argue against the Jewish community, and their arguments, at least in the black community, I want to say it like this, the argument against the Jewish community and the black community as of present, and this is in regards to our celebrities, this is in regards to me, their argument has been that they feel exploited by the Jewish communities, and the Jewish community strategies and endeavors are doing damage, detrimental damage to the culture of black people, and the influence that they are promoting are detrimental to our children and to the families and to the lifestyle and traditions of black people. Yeah, that's pretty much the argument, and they feel like they're being exploited. They don't feel like they're getting their money. They don't feel like they're getting their cut. They feel like, oh, I'm doing all this stuff and I made millions, but I only got a fraction of what I made because the people in charge, who happen to be Jewish, are taking advantage of our resources. That's kind of been the discourse that's been kind of told to us through the media. I mean, through our black celebrities. And so this has, of course, enraged, everyone to be influenced by it, to pay more attention, to look at it, to decipher it. And you've even seen this wave of people buying their masters back and trying to get their ownership back, upset that they sold it in the first place, upset that they didn't understand their contracts, feeling like people weren't really looking out for them or being the friend to them that they portrayed themselves to be. And so it makes it really interesting to me that James McBride chose to focus his work deeply within the relations between blacks and Jews way back into the I think this was in the 20s. He's kind of writing about this. And so it made me look a little more into James McBride. Of course, he was the book of the year, so I was already kind of intrigued by that. So I ended up running across an interview he did, and it's with Irene Katz Connolly, and it's in Forward, a Jewish independent nonprofit magazine. And he talks about what made him write about this. And so it was very interesting because I learned a few things. First, I learned McBride is himself half Jewish and half black. His father died before he was born, so he was pretty much raised by his mother, who was a Jewish woman. And so they asked him, they asked him, the characters represent different ways of being black or Jewish in America. Why was that important to you? And McBride's response, he says, I'm sick of the dissension that happens when the word black or Jew appears in a sentence. It's really detrimental to where we need to be right now. Despite all our differences, there's plenty of common ground. What I tried to do in this book is show how people simply excuse a lot of those differences, set them aside for the moment, and got to the business of finding the meal that would feed us all. I just wanted to show in this book that we have gotten along very well. We have got to stick together and deal with the reality of where we are. We're in deep water and we'll end up in deeper water if we don't pay attention. So he said that this was all about him kind of showing how we've all worked together in the past and how it's helped us get things done in the past, and how right now it's important that we stay unified in our endeavors, or we will allow discord and hate drive us apart, and it'll end up affecting both of us, both groups, in very negative ways. So then they asked him about the intercommunal conflicts and prejudices in the book. They asked him, how did you figure out the contemporary stereotypes about Romanian theater owners? He says he just read a lot. There are a lot of first-person accounts of Jews who came here from Eastern Europe and how they dealt with one another. Some of the attitudes prevailed at the time I learned from my mother. So he says the Romanian theater owners, who, this is about Moshe, right? Moshe, well, that's just how it was in Pennsylvania. My understanding is that they were really hard people because they lived a hard life in Europe. Despite that, they were generously kind when it came to poor people because they understood suffering. Then he talks about how in the book they have Chicken Hill residents, especially the Jewish ones, that want to assimilate into Pottstown white Christian culture in order to achieve the American dream. And they ask him, are they doomed to lose sight of their own traditions and heritage in the process? And he says, these are some of the cultural questions we will always grapple with, right? When you move into the larger society of American life and accept the so-called American existence, what part of that is a sweet piece of candy? And what part is a sour lemon? How much money do you need to live? How big does your house need to be? How much of the American life is really good for you, as opposed to the rich cultural things that helped you survive for thousands of years? And so, to me, I think he's really giving us an idea of what it is, what it is to be a minority in our country. And I think he doesn't really go around sugarcoating it like, oh, blacks and Jews were best friends. No, I think that, especially through the eyes of Nate, we see this distrust that black people kind of harbor against all whites. I think it's so interesting sometimes, especially now, like I'm in my 30s, right? So I'm in my 30s right now. So, and I grew up in the South. And so what I can say about living in the South is there's not a lot of conversation about she's Jewish or she's German, or even, no, she's Mexican, he's El Salvadoran. She is an African Latina, he's Jamaican, she's African American. We're really lumped, and this is really just my impression of the South, and a lot of my friends who are from the South, I'm from Texas, I have a friend from Alabama, and I remember us having a very interesting conversation, because she was saying, I didn't know, she's from Alabama, so she's like, girl, I just thought it was black and white. I ain't know nothing about Hispanics most of my life until I got to college. And it's so funny because I was like, I didn't know anything about deciphering between a German or a Jewish person or an Irish person before I got to college. Before that, it was very much you're black, you're white, you're Mexican, even if they wasn't Mexican. And I remember growing up, and my roots are very mixed, right? So I had Native American roots and French roots. My great grandmother spoke French and Spanish. And it was certain parts of that culture, of our rich cultural background, that I never looked into, I never studied, I never got to really celebrate, because in this country, you don't get an opportunity to say who you are. You appear in the world and people tell you who you are. So I couldn't say, oh, actually, I have more of a Creole background. So we cook different, we talk different, we we call our titles differently. I wasn't really allowed to express that, because what I would tend to get back is, girl, you black. And that was the dominating conversation. And I know this is something that I also experienced even when I got to high school. My Latin friends would be like, well, I'm not Mexican, I'm El Salvadoran. I'm not Mexican, I'm Honduran. And them not being able to celebrate that, because the pushback was always that they were just Mexican. And so now, being an adult, we're seeing people be pulled and isolated and picked apart by their ethnic background. So we're having these talks, these anti-Semitic talks about, oh, Jewish people are taking advantage of me, Jewish people are utilizing me, Jewish people are controlling me, exploiting me. And I think on the other side of that conversation is the question, if they did not help you, if they didn't say, hey, I see the gift in you, I see you're making progress, I have the finances to support and invest in this, you can now be a star, you can now have the resources to be seen, for your talent to be appreciated, for you to be shined upon, who would? I think the book raises that question. The distrust we kind of have for the Jewish community right now, the way blacks are pushing back and saying no more, which I understand the opportunity to have independence. I understand it completely. I understand the desire. But I think that maybe, and this is just from what I read in the book, maybe what we need to do is start renegotiating the way we work with each other. If we don't like the way we're working in the relationship, which I can't deny, you end as a black person, you're kind of the worker bee. Maybe it's time to renegotiate the way we work out our contracts, we work out our relationships, and not the time to spread a negative discourse about other communities, because historically, had it not been for the help and the interest and the understanding support of the Jewish community, I could imagine things being a lot more difficult and advancement being just a little bit slower. Because, I mean, let's be honest, when we think about black success, black wealth, black celebrity, it kind of boils down into very narrow views of what that can look like, whether you're going to be an entertainer or an athlete, or you're going to be an intellectual. Go to school, become a doctor, a lawyer, engineer. We don't always come with the resources that are necessary for that jump. And in order to even get to a place where we can start having these conversations, or celebrities could definitely start having these conversations and start pinpointing and having these kind of discourse, I would say really comes from the initial investment of the Jewish community. Now, with all of that said, that's just what I got from reading the book and what I got from McBride's themes and things that he wrote out in his work. Now, if you feel, because I know y'all see them comments against the windmilling, if you feel there is a lot more to this story, and a lot more to the dissension between the Jewish community and the Black community right now. Please educate me. Share your perspective, share your resources, and share what you think is going on in our communities and why they're clashing and why we're having so much problematic discourse about it. In the description, I do plan on listing the interview that he wrote, that he shared in his in that particular magazine, and we can talk more about this. I would love to talk about this with you guys. It's always a good time, especially when you're on. I know it's a couple videos where I got, and they always the most viewed and the best videos, and I'm afraid this is gonna be one of them because they get in the comment. People that's never watched my page, never been on my channel, get in the comments, be boxing my head in, and I don't understand why. But you're welcome. You're welcome to do so today. Anyway, I'll be back later with the spook who stepped by the door and analysis. So yeah, talk to you soon.